It's time, Cougar Nation. Cougar Tracks. The best season analysis with BYU insider Mitch Harper on KSL News Radio and on video every day on the YouTube page for KSL Sports.
Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio, your legacy home of the Cougars. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. It's Friday, December 19th. We've reached that territory where we probably won't know the dates anymore for the rest of the year, and that's a wonderful thing. And it's also a great thing that BYU football is led by head coach Kalani Sitake, and that's our top story of the day.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
10 years ago today, BYU football lost a game in the Las Vegas Bowl to their heated rival, the University of Utah, 35-28 in Las Vegas. And you could say that was a tough day for BYU, but in many respects, it was a day that was very significant and changed the course of history for BYU football. 10 years ago today, BYU football announced that Kalani Sitake was the new head coach of the BYU program. And I posted some video and content up on the KSL Sports Instagram and my personal X account, Mitch_Harper. It just got me thinking because the first 10 years of Kalani Sitake at BYU had so many twists and turns. And it's a great moment because it's a clean break, because going forward, BYU football is going into a new era as Kalani Sitake signed a long-term extension that's expected to keep him at BYU for the long haul. He said in the radio postgame after the Big 12 championship that he wants to be here for life. And Kalani Sitake is going to be BYU's head coach for the foreseeable future. And you just look at what's happened 10 years ago to now. Kalani really was probably a risky hire when you consider college football head coach hires. No head coaching experience. Really, the only thing that was connecting to BYU was the fact that he played for Lavelle Edwards. He was an alum. But as far as head coach resumes, wasn't much. It was a lot of projection. It was, primarily being the defensive coordinator for Kyle Whittingham at the University of Utah, and then a year at Oregon State. And I remember I was thinking back to that coaching search 10 years ago. Only at BYU would a man shaving his beard and facial hair be a sign that, oh, he's coming. He's interviewing for the job. Remember, former BYU director of football ops, Zach Nyborg, who primarily worked with Gary Anderson at Wisconsin, at Utah State, and then Oregon State, but he spent a year at BYU. He posted what was then Twitter, now X, a picture of Kalani with Gary Anderson. It was a Merry Christmas photo. And I remember Cougar fans analyzing that picture because BYU was in the thick of a coaching search after Bronco Mendenhall took the Virginia job. And Kalani was clean shaven. Usually he had the pops facial hair, the goatee, the mustache, all that. He was clean shaven. So that was code for Kalani's interviewing for this job. But you think back to that hire. Tom Holmoe hires Kalani Sitake. It's turned out to be a home run hire for BYU. And Kalani has not always been perfect. He's taken chances, and sometimes it's backfired. But for the most part, whenever there have been moments where he's pushed to get more resources or to level up the program, it has led to greater success for BYU. And I'm fascinated to see the next iteration of Kalani Sitake because, again, I think we're seeing growth for Kalani Sitake where now he is cemented as the guy. He doesn't have to worry about contract extensions, being underpaid. He's one of the highly paid coaches in the Big 12 and all of college football. Now he's got a chance to really take BYU to great heights and turn them into a juggernaut and be something that they maybe have never been. I know BYU's won a national title. They've won, the Cotton Bowl back in the day. but to become a national powerhouse that's respected. That maybe will never come because it seems like BYU's stretch Y just never gets the benefit of the doubt from anyone in college football. But by being in the Big 12, if you do it consistently at a high level, at some point, people got to put some respect on that name. And I think Kalani Sitake is the best man for the job. This was Kalani reflecting on the biggest things he's learned in the past 10 years as BYU's head coach.
I've learned a lot. And so in 10 years as a head coach, I think I came into it with a lot of ideas and thoughts, and a lot of them worked out, but some didn't. But I think I'm not afraid to try things, and I'm not afraid to be bold. And so going into the next, how many years I got left in coaching, I probably have the same type of attitude, but I've actually learned a lot.
That he has. He has learned a lot. That first season, he was 9-4, and they got to 9 wins. And really, you look back on that and think that was Taysom Hill, Jamal Williams carrying that workload. And then there was a massive dip in 2017 at 4-9. And you thought, is Kalani the right guy? And then 2019, he was on the hot seat, and it took a victory over Idaho State to get that 6th win for Tom Homo to pull out the Ink Coug Special t-shirt, hashtag extend Kalani, and that's how the extension comes about. A lot of twists and turns. I think BYU should be happy that they got into the Big 12 conference, because I often wonder if BYU had not gotten into the Big 12 in 2021 when he was talking with Oregon, when he was talking with Washington, is that his exit route? Because independence was clearly not sustainable, and you were measuring yourself up against nobody. You had no sense of really how to define success. Now in the Big 12, you can define success, even though the Big 12 championship game was a disappointment for BYU. To get to that game was huge. The growth that they've taken every year in the Big 12 era, first year 5-7, competitive in some games, blowouts in others. 2024, massive step, but you ultimately didn't reach Arlington. And then 2025, 11-1 in the regular season. You reached the Big 12 championship game with a true freshman at quarterback. There's consistent growth, and it makes it exciting as to what lies ahead, especially, too, when you consider the recruiting that Kalani Sitake and his staff have put together. Top 25 recruiting class for the 2026 cycle. The program feels like it's going into a new phase with Kalani Sitake locked in as the head coach with that long-term extension moving forward. I think that's what makes it so fascinating and fun to look back on these 10 years when Kalani Sitake first got hired. I was there at the BYU broadcasting building when he was introduced. I was also there at Sam Boyd Stadium when Tom Homo, moments after the Vegas Bowl, Bronco spoke to the media and said his farewell and said something to the effect of, "Everyone's been fair. I appreciate you." And then he exited. And then Tom Homo, out of nowhere, starts to hit the podium, and we hear from the BYU media relations people, "Hey, Tom Homo's going to speak." And I'm thinking, is he really going to announce it right here? Because there was a lot of speculation and reporting that was going on that day at the Vegas Bowl that Kalani was going to be the next head man. And then Tom, after a loss to Utah, BYU basically was like, let's bury that loss and put that as back page news, because a head coach hiring is always front page news. It's always the top story of the day. And so BYU officially announced Kalani right there. I remember Kalani had a post on Facebook and tweet basically saying how grateful he was for his time at Utah and Oregon State, but he was ready to be home at BYU. He was always the right guy for the job because, as Fesi Sitake said last week here on the show, he is BYU football. Kalani Sitake embodies BYU football probably like no other coach ever in the history of the program. Like, Lavelle is the legend. He's the GOAT. But he didn't come up through the ranks living vicariously through BYU football. Kalani Sitake, his whole life, is attached to BYU football. And there's something special about that with him. And for him to have this success and be one of BYU's own, taking the program to great heights, it's pretty exciting. And I'm curious to see how this BYU team will look next week against Georgia Tech in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. A huge opportunity for this team to cap off the season with a 12th win. You know Kalani's going to be dialed in. You know Kalani's motivated. I like his stance when it comes to bowl games where he's not opting out. You see Kansas State, Iowa State opting out of bowl games. Then, of course, Notre Dame. Everyone's talking about the Notre Dame opt-out. But what about Iowa State? What about Kansas State? I know you got coaching changes, but still go play the game. These players wanting to opt out, it's lame. Go play a game. It matters. And for BYU, it gives an opportunity for these young guys to continue to develop and also cap off a memorable season in year number 10 for Kalani Sitake by getting the chance to potentially get that 12th victory, something they haven't done as a program since 2001. You got to go back 24 years, the last time that happened. So Kalani's knocking on the door of doing some special things at BYU, and I'd like to think he's barely just getting started. I mean, it took a long time to get the staff that he envisioned when he took the job to finally bring it all together and get the pieces in place to make it happen. But now that moment's here, and Kalani Sitake is flying high. You can go check out that Instagram post on the KSL Sports IG. Also, some video I shared on the X page of my account, Mitch_Harper. I got a bunch of stuff. I was going through my photo gallery on my iPhone, looking back at things from 2015. My goodness, just some nostalgia. The filters, the poor lighting, the poor filters, the megapixels from those old iPhone 6 cameras. I think I had an iPhone 6 Plus back then. Now we're at iPhone 17. A lot has changed in life. And that's another thing, too. Think about how much the sport of college football has changed since Kalani Sitake took the job 10 years ago today to now. Night and day different. I mean, the college football playoff was only in year 2. That was the 4-team structure back when he took the job in 2015. There was no NIL. There was no transfer portal. There was none of that. And he has evolved and become successful in a climate where you would think this would have made him fold. He would have been the old guard of college football. Not the case. And it's one of the reasons he's the longest tenured head coach now in the new Big 12. I think Kalani's adapted quite nicely. I mean, he was the transfer portal before the transfer portal. Hey, you want to go somewhere? Great. Once a Cougar, always a Cougar. We'll talk about that coming up a little bit later. But he was always open to guys. If you want to transfer, great. More power to you. We appreciate you. We'll help you find your next landing spot. If coaches took that attitude, we're probably not talking about a transfer portal today. We're not talking about a world where, hey, this player has re-signed his new contract to be back in 2026. Kalani's done some really good things for BYU, and he's a guy that has so much passion for BYU, so much passion for the game of football, college football. I'm excited to see what maybe the next 10 years look like. I don't know if Kalani wants to coach another 10 years. It'd be pretty sweet, though, if he got to 20 years total and then rides off into the sunset and retires and maybe has a few championships in the Big 12 or something like that. But he's got a chance for some big victories at BYU in the future with the way that he's building his program. But 10 years ago today, he was hired as BYU's head coach. Let's take a break. Get to my college football playoff picks as the playoff begins tonight. And then around the corner, BYU basketball preview as the Cougars get set to take on Abilene Christian. It's Cougar Tracks, powered by KSL Sports. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube page every day. Coming to you live with the latest in the world of BYU sports and college athletics here on Cougar Tracks. If you're watching this on YouTube or X, appreciate you doing so. Subscribe on YouTube, like the video, helps out the show a ton. And also subscribe to the audio feed wherever you get your audio podcast, Apple, Spotify, Pocket Cast. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. Helps out the show a ton. So the college football playoff begins tonight. Alabama going to take on Oklahoma, and it's kind of a triggering memory because Alabama-Oklahoma, in essence, was the game that basically kept BYU outside the bracket for the remainder of the season after that November 15th weekend in college football. Oklahoma upset Bama, cemented their spot in the playoff. and BYU was kept out. Had Oklahoma lost in Tuscaloosa, you're probably talking about BYU being right there, and I know they still would have needed to perform better against Texas Tech in the eyes of the committee, and I don't trust that committee, but still, you'd like to think they would have been a little bit closer and more in the conversation throughout the process had Oklahoma lost. Still, playoff begins tonight, and I got to say, as someone who loves college football and feels like I'm in the high percentile of college football fans and viewers, there's just no momentum. There's just no excitement for this playoff. I think from a just casual sports fan perspective, I think maybe, I think of this, though. Why is that? New Year's Day is huge in college football, and that's great. But I just feel like college football having its postseason in the thick of the holidays, yeah, it's great. People are home, but it's also a busy time, and no one has time to just sit back and be relaxing because there's parties, there's this, there's that, there's so much going on, so you don't consume the content, and the buildup is not as anticipated. It feels like sometimes there's some big regular season games in college football. Maybe I'm off on that, but it's always weird to me with, oh yeah, the college football playoff is happening tonight, and it's Alabama and it's Oklahoma, and it's in Norman. It's just weird. But anyway, let's get to my picks. College football playoff picks. So tonight, Alabama, Oklahoma, 6 p.m. Oklahoma's a favorite in Norman on ABC. I'm going to go with the Sooners again. I don't think Alabama's that great of a team this year. I think, honestly, BYU would have beat this Alabama team, honestly. Had BYU gotten a shot against the Crimson Tide, I would have liked that matchup. I'm going to go with the Sooners to get it done once again. And then tomorrow's games, number 7, Texas A&M against Miami, 10 a.m. on ABC. I'm going with A&M to protect home field. No one has lost a home game in the first round yet. I know it's just only 1 year. I'm going to go with A&M, protect their home turf. Miami's good. And at one point, I thought they were the best team in the college football. But they kind of slipped up a bit. And look, they added some style points late in the regular season, and that game was at Virginia Tech. But I like to take Texas A&M a little bit better in this game. I know that they've had some staff changes with Colin Klein going to Kansas State, going to his alma mater. They didn't look great against Texas in a rivalry game, but I'm going with A&M to win by a touchdown over Miami. I just would be surprised if Miami wins a big game like that on the road in College Station. So give me the Aggies. Then a game, well, let's go to this one first. James Madison, Oregon, 5-12 matchup in Eugene. I think Oregon rolls big. I just don't see with James Madison having a coach who's on his way out to UCLA and Chesney. There's just no way that he was able to get his guys completely ready for this while also juggling the roster for UCLA and knowing who's in, who's out, and getting to know who those players are. That's a lot to juggle. Oregon wins big, but I'm glad that James Madison's in. I'm totally fine with group of 5 teams in the playoff. If they earned it, if you got a rule that says 5 highest ranked conference champions, I don't care what conference they're from. They're the 5 highest ranked champions. Let them be in the tournament. I don't need to see, this notion of AAA football versus FBS football. Like, no. Everyone in college football needs to have high stakes games during the regular season. Everyone talks about how the 12-team playoff is taking away the regular season. James Madison played meaningful football down the stretch where it was win or go home, and they still had a chance to go with the playoff, and it all worked out for them with the ACC basically crowning a 5-loss champ. James Madison got in. I'm okay with it. And if it's a blowout too, it's not an indictment that the playoff doesn't work. It's very rare to beat any top 5 team in their home venue on the road for anyone. I've seen many teams go into top 4 venues and get hammered. That's just how college football works. But people will then say, it's a blowout. This 12-team playoff doesn't want to work. And we're going to expand this thing to 24. Are you serious? So the discourse with college football playoff every single year, it's just Makes me want to roll my eyes. And then number 6, Ole Miss versus 11 Tulane. This is going to be at 1:30 right before the 5 p.m. game with Oregon and James Madison. And this game has some intrigue for BYU fans, of course, because Tulane is quarterbacked by Jake Retzlaff, and Kalani even referenced they're pulling for Jake and the Green Wave.
Once you're a Cougar, you're always a Cougar, so we want to help them whether they're here or they're moving on, and so that's always been our mindset. I mean, we were still connected to Jake Retzlaff. He's getting ready to play this weekend, and we're going to be cheering him on, and really excited about him being in the playoffs. So there's nothing but love here, and communicating and making sure that we're all on the same page is going to be key.
Tulane got completely hammered against Ole Miss earlier in the season. Feels like it's obviously a new look Ole Miss with a new head coach and Golding stepping in for Lane Kiffin. I think Ole Miss wins this game in Oxford because the Grove is going to be so hyped for this moment, this opportunity to host a playoff game. Because honestly, in my lifetime, I can't think of an Ole Miss team that's played a meaningful football game like this in a long time. I mean, yeah, they had that win, I think about a decade ago when they beat number 1 Alabama and they stormed the field. They had College Game Day. That was huge. But in the postseason, they had a Peach Bowl where they played TCU, got crushed. But again, postseason football, playing for a national championship, this is new territory for Ole Miss. It's new territory for Tulane, too. Tulane deserves a spot. I mean, they got through the American, which was very good this year, and Jake Retzlaff led that team. I honestly thought Retzlaff was going to get benched after that UTSA game where he was brutal in that game, and Tulane lost in San Antonio, but he bounced back. And that's just Jake Retzlaff in a nutshell. That guy, when you have him down and out and you don't expect much of him, he responds with so much intensity and just commitment. Like, that guy wills himself to success. And I'm happy that Jake is having the success he's having because he was a really good quarterback for BYU. And look, it's worked for everyone involved. BYU is set with Bear Bachmeier and then Ryder Lyons. They've got their quarterback factory going right now for BYU. And for Jake Retzlaff, he went to a program that gave him the keys. He had a connection with the head coach in Sumrall from his time at Troy. He trusted Retzlaff, gave him the keys basically to the program, despite arriving in July, and he took off with the possession and led this team to the playoff. Impressive stuff. And I hope Tulane keeps this close. I think they could, but I think Ole Miss still wins by about 7 to 10 points. But I want to see this be a game. I would love to see Retzlaff have a chance to pull off the upset and have his moment, because you know that guy would, if he gets a chance in a post-game victory celebration in a press conference in the playoff, that guy will give some gems, some great quotes. You know, Jake was never one to not give good cuts, good sound bites. He was always good at that at BYU. And he's doing it again at Tulane. He's been a really good quarterback for the Green Wave. I'll go through the rest of my bracket really quick. Indiana versus Oklahoma. I've got Indiana in the Rose Bowl. Oregon versus Texas Tech. I've got Texas Tech in the Capital One Orange Bowl. Georgia versus Ole Miss. I've got Georgia. And then Ohio State versus Texas A&M. I've got Ohio State. Then Texas Tech versus Indiana. I've got Texas Tech taking down the Hoosiers in the Peach Bowl on January 9th. And then Ohio State defeating Georgia in the Fiesta Bowl. And then the national championship, Texas Tech versus Ohio State. I've got the Buckeyes taking down Texas Tech in the national title. But I think Texas Tech gets to that game, the national title in Miami, January 19th, and has a shot to be 60 minutes away from a title. I'm that sold on Texas Tech and this team. That defensive front is as good as anyone in college football. They can hang with anyone and shut down anyone. So I'm really excited to see what Texas Tech can do. And it'd be huge for the Big 12 if Texas Tech could just go win the whole dang thing. But I think they ultimately come up short against the Buckeyes in the national title. Final break, BYU basketball tips off tonight against Abilene Christian. We'll hit on that game next here on Cougar Tracks. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on The KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio. Mitch Harper here with you. BYU basketball in action tonight, 7:30 p.m. tip-off on TNT and KSL News Radio. Pre-game on the radio begins at 6:30 here on the legacy home of the Cougars. And BYU will take on Abilene Christian at the Marriott Center. It's the third consecutive home game for the Cougars. Third home game in 6 days. They're just coming quick. After a long break without any action in the Marriott Center, third game in 6 days. It's been a lot of fun getting back and forth at the Marriott Center this past week. And, you know, I will say it's the first ever meeting between BYU and Abilene Christian. Whenever I think of ACU, I think of the 2021 NCAA tournament in Indianapolis in the bubble. BYU, if they just simply beat UCLA, and I know that's weird to say, simply beat UCLA, but remember, back in 2021 in the NCAA tournament, everyone was hoping BYU would play UCLA in the first round of the tournament. UCLA beat Michigan State in the first four. Then BYU faced Jaime Jaquez and a hobbled Johnny Juzang in the round of 64 in the NCAA tournament. And had they won that game, they would have played ACU, Abilene Christian, who upset Texas, one of the great first-round upsets in that year's NCAA tournament. It was one of the few times where the bracket broke for BYU and had a clear path to the Sweet 16, but Jaime Jaquez, Johnny Juzang, they had other ideas. And as remember, UCLA went on to the Final Four, lost at the horn to Gonzaga. Look, to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, you need some Cinderella to emerge in your path. You can't play chalk the entire way and assume you're going to go deep as a lower seed. UCLA is an 11 seed. They faced a 14 seed in the Sweet 16, off and running. And it helped too that there was no travel as well. But anyway, that's what I always think of when I see Abilene Christian. The near opportunity BYU had to face them in the round of 32, and it was a missed opportunity because I think had BYU beat UCLA, they would have beat ACU and then played in the Sweet 16. And at that point, it's house money, man. You're making a run potentially to the Final Four. Now it's a different era for BYU. Cougars are now in a place where, I don't want to say Final Four is the expectation, but Sweet 16 at a minimum is the expectation for this BYU team. And the way that they're playing this month, they're looking like a team that's good enough to reach Indianapolis again and get to the Final Four. And last night, when you speak of the aura of this BYU team, it's highlighted when you've got guys like LeBron James, King James, paying his respects to AJ Dybantsa. Last night, the LA Lakers played the Utah Jazz. And after the game concluded, LeBron, the king himself, paid his respects to AJ Dybantsa courtside, who was sitting there at the Delt Center. What world are we living in, man? Where a BYU guy is getting dapped up by the king, LeBron James. Ultimate respect. And then Utah Jazz Bear gets in the mix as well. That was a cool moment to see that. King James himself paying respects to the next wave, the new star of the NBA, because that's, again, what we're talking about with AJ Dybantsa. We're talking about potentially a guy that could be the face of the NBA and the face of the sport of basketball on the planet. I still don't know if Cougar fans sometimes wrap their mind around that level of talent that we're seeing at the Marriott Center every single night. AJ previously worked out with LeBron once upon a time out in California. They had a workout, and he met Rich Paul and all those guys. And AJ is a well-traveled guy, but it's cool to see the respect that these NBA players have given to him. And as a proxy, there's a lot of respect given to Kevin Young, his NBA connections. He is a well-respected guy in the NBA circles. But I just thought that was such a cool moment to see LeBron paying his respects to AJ Dybantsa. I watched it last night on the broadcast and saw that, and then to see the clips today is just really cool to see. AJ is on a tear this month. He's been outstanding along with this entire BYU team. Last time out, he had 28 points, 10 rebounds in the win over Pacific, where they're again, walking bags of cash. I hope BYU comes out with some shooting shirt, walking bags of cash with branding on the shooting shirt. That's what BYU needs to do. Equipment team, if you haven't done it already, make a quick edit. Have the players trot out pregame walking bags of cash shooting shirts. Get it done. Make it happen. But BYU's a huge favorite over Abilene Christian. Massive favorite. ACU played Arizona earlier this week on Tuesday in Tucson. They lost 96-62. Arizona had about 6 guys scored double figures, I think it was. Yeah, 6 players scored in double figures against Abilene Christian earlier this week for Arizona. So I would expect another blowout for BYU. Probably they're in the 90s. BYU wins by more than 30. That's what I would expect here. But again, it's just another case and opportunity of the second unit stringing together some games. I want to see Tyler Moross have another follow-up performance where he was excellent against Pacific, follow it up with another nice game. I want to see if Alexei Kostic gives it a go and is able to play. He was dealing with an illness earlier this week. Can he follow up his great performance last Saturday against UC Riverside? Boop, all those guys. Because, again, we know what the starting 5 is capable of. You know, maybe you could get nitpicky and say Moo Davis hit some threes. He was 0 of 7 against Pacific. And that's still always an area where BYU can get better, I think, is just knocking down the 3 ball at a higher clip because you just know they're capable of that. But by all accounts, I mean, just stay healthy, stay the course, and get one step closer to Big 12 play. Non-conference play closes coming up on Monday on December 22nd against Eastern Washington, and then it's Big 12 play. And just looking around the Big 12, too, it's such a good league. I don't quite understand how it's being rated the third best league by Ken Palm, and I know there's different ways that they go into the ratings, and I'm not going to get into all that, but the quality of the wins this year in non-conference for the Big 12, they're living up to expectations. Last year, they were a massive disappointment in non-conference play. Everyone was. BYU, everyone. No one was beating the big dogs in power conference non-con matchups. This year, they're playing at a high level. Iowa State's undefeated. Arizona's undefeated. BYU's only losses to UConn by 2 points. Houston has been great this year. I mean, and look, this feels like a down Houston team compared to what they've been, and they're still top 10 in predictive ratings. You know, Kansas, Texas Tech. You know, we're talking about a league where Texas Tech's maybe the 7th best team in the predictive ratings. They're going to have a huge game coming up tomorrow against Duke at Madison Square Garden, but I'm just thoroughly impressed with the Big 12. Even teams like Arizona State, you know, they lost earlier this week against UCLA. I was watching that game. Colorado, 10-1. It's been a light schedule. They had a game a couple nights ago where the arena was completely empty because of high wind advisories in the Boulder, Denver area. TCU's had some great wins this year. Oklahoma State, they look really good despite that loss in Bedlam last week. Again, I just think every night in the Big 12 is going to just be off the charts good. And we're going to see more basketball, too, throughout the entire week. You're going to have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, maybe some Sunday games. Well, not for BYU, of course, but pretty much every night we're getting Big 12 basketball content because you've got ESPN, you've got Fox in the mix this year, you've got TNT, you've also got Peacock. So a lot of different broadcast partners. You can spread out that content. You're going to have pretty much Big 12 basketball every single night throughout the winter, and it's going to be a wonderful thing. Speaking of TNT, it's going to be cool to see Grant Hill. He's going to be on the call for the TV broadcast of BYU Abilene Christian for this game. So pretty awesome to see a college basketball legend, Duke Blue Devil, former NBA great, broadcasting a random BYU Abilene Christian game, but TNT broadcasts are excellent. They're top shelf, both for football and basketball. So looking forward to seeing Grant Hill inside the Marriott Center tonight. I can't recall Grant Hill having a previous visit to the Marriott Center. I know BYU played Duke back in the Maui Invitational in 92, but I can't think of any other reason why Grant Hill would have possibly been visiting the Marriott Center at all in his prior travels. So pretty cool to have a basketball legend like Grant Hill on the call tonight for BYU Abilene Christian, which again tips off at 7:30, not 7:30 p.m. Pregame on KSL News Radio begins at 6:30. I think BYU wins by, let's say, 35 points. I think there'll be another dominant showing by AJ Dybantsa and crew at the Marriott Center, and another fun night as we inch closer to Big 12 play coming up just around the corner. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the show on all audio podcast platforms, and then subscribe to the KSL Sports YouTube so you can get notified of these videos when they go live, and you can watch these videos wherever and however you watch or listen to the show. So appreciate you for always being on board of the podcast, and we will talk on Monday, getting you ready for game week for BYU football and closing out non-conference play for BYU hoops right here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSL Sports.